Heat shimmered above the gravel road like the air itself was trying to escape. Morning sun hammered the tin roofs and turned every pale fence board into a glare. In the middle of that brightness, an older man stood at the edge of his small yard, one foot on dry grass, the other on packed dirt, looking at a phone that seemed embarrassed to be as old as it was. The screen showed a time that made his chest tighten. He adjusted the thrift store blazer on his shoulders, too warm for the weather, too big in the sleeves, and checked the pocket where an envelope sat like a secret. Bus fare. A resume folded so many times the creases had creases. He had ironed the blazer last night anyway, pressing down with a rag because the iron sputtered and sometimes burned. This interview in the city wasn't a dream job. It wasn't even a good job. It was a job that paid on time. A job with hours. A job that meant groceries without counting coins. It was the kind of chance you circled in red because you didn't get to circle many anymore. He took one last look toward the road, judging how long it would take to reach the bus stop. The neighbor's dog barked lazily from behind a chain-link fence. A bird hopped through dust, pecking at something invisible. Everything felt ordinary, until a sound cut through the quiet like a knife in cloth. Tires. Fast. Too fast for this road. A luxury SUV, black and glossy, the kind that looked wrong on a street where most vehicles had faded paint and missing hubcaps, came barreling around the bend and jerked to a stop near his yard. Gravel sprayed. The SUV shuddered, engine still running, as if even it had nerves. For half a second, nothing happened. Then the driver's door swung open, and a sharply dressed woman stumbled out like the ground had tilted. She caught herself on the doorframe, hand pressed hard against her side. Her breathing was loud, uneven, the sound someone makes when they're trying not to fall apart in public. She was dressed like she belonged in a glass building downtown, not on a dusty road in a rural neighborhood. The jewelry at her wrist flashed when she moved. Sunlight sparked off it like a warning flare. But the wealth didn't make her look powerful. It made her look exposed. The older man called, already moving without thinking. She turned her face toward him, eyes wide and unfocused, and tried to speak. Whatever came out was swallowed by a cough that bent her forward. Her knees buckled. He reached her in 2 strides and caught her elbow before she hit the gravel. Her skin felt hot through the sleeve of her blouse. He guided her away from the SUV and toward the shade of a scraggly tree at the edge of his yard, the only shadow on that stretch of road. Easy, he said, voice low, steady. Sit. Here, take your time. He offered her his arm like he'd offered it to his late wife on icy sidewalks. He lowered her carefully onto the grass where it was less sharp than the road. She clutched a small pendant at her neck as if it was an anchor. Her fingers trembled around it. He ran back to his porch and grabbed the plastic jug of water he kept for working outside. Poured some into a chipped cup. When he returned, he crouched just out of reach, not wanting to crowd her. Small sips, he said. I'm going to call for help. He tried to dial. 1 bar, then none. He walked 2 steps, held the phone up, turned it like it could catch signal if he begged correctly. The call rang once. Dropped. A screen notification blinked. No service. He swallowed irritation and tried again. That was when the first neighbor appeared, Mrs. Larkin from down the road, wiping her hands on her apron, eyes locked on the black SUV like it might be an animal. What on earth? She started, then saw the woman on the grass, saw the older man crouched near her, and the words shifted shape. Concern became suspicion in the space between one blink and the next. Another neighbor came out. Then another. Someone called to someone else. A teenager coasted up on a bike, phone already in his hand, not because he knew what was happening, but because a story was happening and he didn't want to miss it. So, Mrs. Larkin said, voice sharp with a politeness that wasn't polite at all, "What are you doing?" "She's sick," he answered, still working the phone. "I'm trying to call." The teenager raised his camera. The lens pointed like an accusation. A whisper moved through the forming half-circle of bodies. It didn't matter that the older man was kneeling with his hands visible. It didn't matter that the woman's breathing sounded like it was scraping against a wall. In a crowd, details didn't become truth. They became material. Why is he touching her? That car's not his. She looks. Look at her. Is he? The older man lifted his head, heat rising into his face. "I'm helping," he said, louder now. "Someone call an ambulance. Please." The woman tried to speak again. Her lips moved. Her eyes rolled, searching for focus, searching for air. The crowd leaned in like it was a show. Then a man stepped forward like he'd been waiting for his moment. He wore a bright reflective vest and a swagger that didn't match the street. In his hand was a walkie-talkie, though nobody had ever heard it make a sound. "Everybody back," he announced, voice booming. "I'm Community Watch." The words landed with the weight of authority, even if no one had ever voted for him. He planted himself between the older man and the woman on the grass, puffed up like a gate. "You," he said, pointing at the older man, "step away from her. Now, hands where I can see them." The older man stared, confused, then glanced at the woman's face, pale, damp, struggling. He checked his phone again. The time was no longer forgiving. A choice opened in him like a split board. Run to the bus stop and keep his last shot alive, or stay and risk losing everything anyway. Behind him, the crowd's whispers grew teeth. The teenager's phone captured every second. The older man drew a slow breath, steadying himself, and stayed where he was. Far off, so faint it could have been imagination, a soft thump-thump touched the sky. It didn't register to anyone yet. The filming continued. The older man's reputation was being decided in real time, and nobody in the half-circle seemed to notice the sound that promised the balance was about to change. The man in the reflective vest took over like the road had turned into a courtroom, and he'd been handed the gavel. "So," he said, louder than necessary, turning slightly so the crowd could see his face, "I'm going to need you to move away from the lady. For her safety." "She needs an ambulance," the older man replied. He kept his voice calm on purpose, the way you talk to someone holding a match near gasoline. "Reception's bad. Somebody else call." "Protocol first," the vest man snapped, as if he'd rehearsed the phrase. "Identity. Intent. Then we proceed." He gestured like he was directing traffic. "You," he pointed at the teenager filming, "keep recording. We need documentation." The teenager's eyes brightened, not with responsibility, but with importance. He shifted for a better angle, narration already forming in his mouth. "Name," the vest man demanded, stepping closer to the older man, chin lifted. The older man gave it, offered his driver's license when asked, held it out with 2 fingers so nobody could claim he'd made a sudden move. The vest man didn't take it immediately. He let it hang in the air, letting the moment stretch so the crowd could feel the tension he wanted them to feel. "You live here?" he asked finally, as if the yard behind the older man wasn't proof enough. "Yes." "And why?" the vest man continued, voice rising. "Were you holding her?" "She almost fell. I caught her." A woman in the crowd scoffed loudly. "That's what they all say." The older man's jaw tightened. He looked toward the woman on the grass. Her chest rose in short, shallow pulses. Sweat dampened her hairline. Her fingers clung to that pendant like it was the only solid thing in the world. He said gently, "Try to breathe with me. In, out." The vest man shifted, blocking him from her line of sight. "No coaching. Step back." "I'm not coaching," the older man said, anger threading his words despite his effort. "I'm trying to keep her conscious." 5 minutes, the vest man announced, raising his phone like a stopwatch. "We wait 5 minutes. If you can't prove exactly what you were doing and why you were touching her, you're coming with me until the authorities arrive." The crowd reacted like he'd introduced a fun new rule. Murmurs turned into excited chatter. People looked at their own phones to match the timer. Someone laughed, high and nervous, as if humiliation was entertainment. "Look at his shoes," a man muttered. "Those boots have holes." "And that phone," another added. "Who even still uses one like that?" The older man's cheeks burned. Worn boots, old phone, a blazer from a donation rack. In a different setting, they were just objects. Hey, they were evidence. Someone pointed at the SUV. He was probably gonna steal it. "I saw him pulling her," a woman said, voice confident in the way people get when they are building a story. "She didn't look like she wanted him near her." "She can't even stand," the older man snapped, then forced his tone down. She's sick. Please, somebody help me call. The teenager filming zoomed in on his face as if capturing anger proved guilt. The older man walked toward the road, searching for signal again. One bar flickered, teasing him. He dialed. The call rang. Once. Twice. Dropped. He tried again. Dropped faster this time. Behind him, the vest man narrated over the scene like a commentator. Notice how he keeps moving around. Notice how he's trying to, what? Get rid of something? Trying to buy time. I'm trying to call an ambulance, the older man shouted, and immediately regretted giving the crowd the loudness it wanted. The woman's breathing hitched. She coughed, then gagged, hand pressed tighter to her side. Her eyes fluttered. The pendant chain glinted at her throat. He kneeled near her again, careful, keeping space. Look at me, he urged softly. Stay with me. Keep breathing. The vest man stomped forward and thrust an arm out. Back. You're blocking air and shade, the older man said through clenched teeth. Move. Don't tell me what to do, the vest man snapped, then turned to the crowd for support. This is exactly how they act when they get caught. The phrase they hung there, vague enough to fit any bias anyone carried. Several neighbors shifted uncomfortably. One older woman looked like she wanted to speak but swallowed it. A man in a ball cap stared at the ground. A few whispered, "He's always been nice," but the whispers didn't rise into action. Silence became a wall the older man couldn't climb. His phone buzzed. A notification lit the screen. Missed call, unknown number. He stayed at it, stomach dropping. Then another buzz. Missed call, unknown number. He knew that pattern. City number. Employer. His thumb hovered, wanting to call back, wanting to save the thread of his future. The woman on the grass made a small, broken sound that pulled him back. She was slipping. Her lips had gone pale. Her hand still clenched the pendant like a vow. He put the phone in his pocket and used both hands to fan air toward her face, not touching her, just pushing shade and breeze in her direction. He shrugged off his blazer, his one decent layer, and spread it on the ground between her and the gravel, as if fabric could protect her from a world that suddenly felt cruel. Somebody, he said to the crowd, voice hoarse now, please. She needs help. Nobody moved. They watched her suffer because moving meant involvement, and involvement meant risk, and risk meant being the next target. The crowd had built a machine of suspicion so efficient it jammed compassion. 3 minutes, the vest man announced, eyes gleaming. Tick-tock. The teenager kept filming. Another person started filming too, adding their own commentary. Guy in the blazer is acting sketchy. Community Watch is handling it. The older man looked up, meeting eyes one by one. You know me, he said quietly. Some of you do. A couple of people looked away, not because they didn't know, but because knowing made their silence heavier. The woman's eyes opened wider suddenly, panic flashing. She tried to speak. The words came out tangled. She grabbed the older man's sleeve, weakly, like she was trying to hold on to the only calm thing she'd found. The vest man saw it and seized the moment. See? She's trying to get away from him. She's trying to, the older man began, then stopped. Explaining didn't work here. Every sentence became fuel. 10 seconds, the vest man said, voice rising. 9, 8. The older man stood slowly, hands open at his sides, showing he wasn't a threat. He could feel the interview slipping like sand through fingers. He could also feel the line he wouldn't cross, leaving a sick stranger alone because people were cruel. 3, the vest man said, stepping close. 2. Leaves began to tremble overhead. Dust lifted in small spirals near the roadside. The sound returned, louder now. Thump, thump, thump. No longer faint, no longer ignorable. 1, the vest man said, and reached for the older man's arm as if he could make detention real by acting like it was. The air pressure changed. A low roar rolled across the neighborhood like approaching weather. The crowd's confidence swelled for one last second, right before the sky announced it had something to say. Dust drifted into the yard in thin sheets, scratching at skin, catching in eyelashes. The older man blinked through it, steadying his breath the way he'd learned to do after the doctor told him his back would never be the same. Pain had changed his life quietly, the way rut changes would, slowly, until one day the structure gives. He'd spent decades doing work that kept other people's lives running, fixing leaks, patching roofs, repairing machines, replacing broken steps. The kind of labor nobody praised because it wasn't supposed to be noticed. Then came the injury, then layoffs, then the long, dull season of we went with another candidate. The rejections piled up in his mind even when the emails got deleted. His wife had been the steady place in that storm, until she wasn't there anymore. Cancer didn't care about steady men or hard years. One day she was laughing at the kitchen sink, sleeves rolled up, soap bubbles on her hands. Another day the bed was too big and the house sounded like an empty shell. He promised her, in the last days when her voice had turned thin, that he would keep going, that he would stay independent, that he wouldn't become a burden on anyone. Not because pride mattered more than people, but because she'd built their life with him, brick by brick, and he wanted to honor it. Today's interview wasn't about winning. It was about keeping that promise. The envelope in his pocket held bus fare counted twice. The resume inside had been printed at the library, then folded and unfolded until the paper looked tired. He practiced answering questions in the mirror, not to impress anyone, but to remind himself he still belonged in a room where people made decisions. And now, here he was, standing in his own yard, being treated like a criminal because he'd reached out to steady a sick woman. He looked at the teenager filming. The kid wasn't evil, just young, hungry for attention, taught by the world that recording mattered more than helping. "Son," the older man said, voice quieter than the wind beginning to whip the leaves, "you can keep filming. But if you want to be useful, call emergency services. Tell them there's a woman struggling to breathe." The teenager hesitated, eyes darting between the older man and the vest man. Social gravity pulled him toward the loudest voice. The older man didn't shame him, didn't snap. He simply repeated, "Softer, help her. Please." That softness, so out of place in the heat of accusation, hung in the air like a cooling cloth. The woman on the grass turned her head slightly. Her lips moved. A fragment escaped. "No, security." The older man leaned closer, careful. "What's your name?" Her eyes fought to focus. She began, then winced, clutching her side harder. The pendant slipped through her fingers. It wasn't just jewelry. It had weight, design, a small emblem that looked like it belonged to an organization, not a fashion store. A memory flickered through her expression, like she was somewhere else for a second. Earlier that morning, in a car scented with leather and money, she'd been arguing into her phone. "I don't need an entourage," she'd said, voice sharp, controlled. "Someone needs help now. If I wait, it's too late." A voice on the other end, male, insistent, had warned her about risk, about optics, about protocol. She cut it off. People don't stop bleeding because it's inconvenient. Now, stranded in a neighborhood that treated her like a prop and treated the older man like a predator, her wealth meant nothing. Fear still tightened her throat. Pain still made her shake. The older man took his blazer, his one attempt at looking respectable, and used it to fan her face, then set it on the ground between her and the date like a barrier against indignity. The vest man interpreted the movement as defiance. "Don't touch anything," he barked. "Don't change the scene." "She's not as seen," the older man said, and his voice carried something hard now. Not anger, but conviction. "She's a person." The vest man sneered. "And you're a suspect." The older man stood fully, hands open, posture straight despite the ache in his spine. He refused to flinch, refused to give the crowd the satisfaction of fear. The rotor's sound swelled into a physical force. The leaves overhead whipped. Dust rose in thick waves. People's hair tugged at their faces. Shirts snapped against skin. For the first time, the crowd looked up, squinting into the sky, confusion cracking their certainty. The older man didn't look up immediately. He looked down at the woman, making sure she was still breathing, still here. Then he lifted his eyes, and the sound became a truth you could feel in your bones. Something powerful was arriving, and it wasn't coming to join the rumor. It was coming to replace it. The helicopter crested into view over the trees like a sudden mechanical storm. Its blades chopped the air into loud, relentless pieces. The crowd stumbled back instinctively, arms up to shield faces from a grit. The vest man tried to shout something about permission, about rules, but his voice vanished under the roar. The helicopter descended, hovering low enough that the yard grass flattened beneath it. Dust exploded outward, sweeping across the half-circle of neighbors. The teenager filming had to brace his stance, squinting through flying gravel, still recording because the story had just outgrown him. With practiced precision, the helicopter settled onto a patch of open space near the older man's yard. The landing skids kissed the ground, and the machine held steady like it owned the sky. For a moment, nobody moved. The world was vibration and noise and dust. Then the rotor began to slow, heavy and deliberate. The roar softened into a rhythmic churn. The air stopped punching as hard. A side door slid open. Faced out was a person in medical gear, then another, calm, efficient, moving with the brisk purpose of people trained to ignore spectacle. They carried a compact medical bag and a folded stretcher. Behind them stepped a suited security lead, tall, posture-controlled, eyes scanning like a camera with a brain. The crowd parted without realizing it, as if their bodies understood authority before their minds did. The medics went straight to the woman on the grass. One said, dropping to a knee, voice focused, "We've got you. Stay with me." The woman's eyes flickered, and recognition softened her panic a fraction. She tried to speak. "We're here," the medic said. "You're safe." The security lead lifted a hand to an earpiece. "Visual confirmation," he said, voice low but carrying in the hush that followed the helicopter's slowing blades. "She's located." The words landed like a crack in the crowd's story. This wasn't random. This wasn't a rich person's accident. This was an organized response. The suited security lead turned, gaze settling on the older man. Not accusing, assessing. "Sir," he said, tone respectful, "what happened?" The older man swallowed dust and spoke plainly. "She pulled up fast. She was in trouble. I tried to get her into shade. Tried to call for help. No signal." He gestured toward the crowd without bitterness. They assumed the worst. The vest man lunged forward, sensing his control slipping. "I protected her. I stopped him from." The security lead lifted a hand, not dramatic, just final. "Step aside. I'm community watch," the vest man insisted, voice shrill now, fighting the reality that a helicopter had invalidated him without even trying. "You can't just." A medic's body camera, clipped at chest level, blinked with a small red light. Another medic had one too. Unblinking witnesses. Meanwhile, the teenager's phone kept rolling, and so did several others. Multiple angles, multiple narratives about to collide. The medical team worked fast. Oxygen. Questions. Monitoring. One of them addressed the woman by name, said it with familiarity that made the crowd stiffen. The woman's breathing steadied slightly. Her eyes cleared just enough to find the older man. She reached out, fingers trembling, and caught his hand. The older man froze, then allowed it, gentle, steady, not because he needed vindication, but because she needed a tether. Her voice was weak, but she pushed the words out like they mattered. "He helped me," she said, louder than her condition should have allowed, eyes fixed on the crowd. "He saved me." Phone zoomed in, hungry for the pivot. The same people who'd filmed him as a threat now filmed him as a hero, the morality of the crowd flipping with the speed of a swipe. The security lead's expression didn't change. He wasn't here for drama. He was here for facts. He pulled out his phone and tapped a contact, then hit speaker. A voice came through. Professional, controlled. "This is counsel. Status." "We have her," the security lead said. "Medical team is stabilizing." There was an attempted detention by an individual claiming community authority. Crowd interference. Multiple recordings. The counsel voice tightened. "Understood. Preserve evidence. Law enforcement has been notified. Compliance will be present for reporting." The crowd's faces shifted, some paling, some stiffening in defensive denial. The words counsel and compliance didn't sound like rumor. They sounded like paperwork and consequences. The vest man tried to speak again, but his confidence had started leaking. I was just being careful. You never know. The older man looked at him, not with triumph, but with weary clarity. The security lead turned to the vest man. Name? What? Your name, the security lead repeated, voice calm, which somehow made it more intimidating. And your affiliation? Are you certified, trained, authorized by local authorities, or self-appointed? The vest man glanced around for support. The crowd that had cheered him earlier suddenly found interest in their shoes, their screens, the sky. I lead the neighborhood watch, he said, trying to inflate the words. We keep people safe. Did you physically restrain this man? The security lead asked. I put my hand on his arm. To detain him until. Detain, the security lead echoed, and that single word turned the vest man's performance into something measurable. The older man spoke quietly. He tried to pull me away while she was struggling. He blocked shade, blocked help. The vest man's mouth opened, but nothing convincing came out. The security lead nodded once and gestured to one of the medics. Log that. The medic's camera kept blinking. A record, not an opinion. The woman, still holding the older man's hand, squeezed weakly and looked toward the crowd. Her voice steadied on anger this time, controlled, righteous. He kept asking you to call for help, she said. And you, her gaze swept over the phones. You made it a show. A ripple moved through the half-circle. People shifted. Some lowered their cameras, shame creeping into their posture. Others kept filming harder, because admitting wrongdoing was harder than pretending it had all been complicated. The older man didn't gloat, didn't preach. He simply looked at the security lead and then at the vest man. And when he spoke, it wasn't revenge. It was truth delivered like a nail driven straight. You didn't protect her, he said, voice steady. You protected your assumption. The line landed like a door slamming. The crowd, once united in suspicion, split into fragments, apology forming in some faces, defensiveness hardening in others, fear taking shape in a few who suddenly understood how many cameras had captured their cruelty. Above them, the helicopter's blades slowed further, and in the quiet that followed, reality took over. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just undeniable. Local law enforcement arrived not as saviors but as administrators of a situation that already had a record. A patrol car rolled up, then another. An ambulance followed, its siren briefly cutting through the lingering helicopter noise before fading into focused urgency. Officers moved with the practiced calm of people trained to separate heat from fact. They didn't shout. They didn't grandstand. They took statements. The woman was transferred carefully to the ambulance once stabilized enough. A medic stayed with her, monitoring. Her eyes found the older man again as they lifted her, and she gave a tiny nod, gratitude without theatrics. A representative arrived shortly after, clipboard, badge, professional demeanor that didn't sparkle like money but felt heavier. Compliance, as promised. Legal counsel by phone, then in person. Not to punish for sport. This wasn't vengeance, but to ensure what happened was documented correctly, because documentation was how systems learned or stayed broken. The vest man was asked to step aside and provide identification. His reflective vest suddenly looked less like authority and more like a costume. No one is arresting you right now, an officer said, tone firm but neutral. But you will be identified and your actions will be reviewed. The phrase will be reviewed did something the crowd understood. It promised consequences without melodrama. The vest man tried to argue. I was just trying to keep her safe. The officer glanced at the footage already being collected. Phones held out, medics' body cameras, timestamps, audio. We'll determine that. Evidence was gathered in a way that made rumor irrelevant. Officers asked for videos. People hesitated at first, afraid now, the way they hadn't been afraid when they accused. But the teenager stepped forward. He held out his phone with both hands, like it was suddenly heavy. I filmed the whole thing, he said, voice smaller than before. It's unedited. The officer took the phone, noted the teenager's name, and told him how it would be handled. The teenager swallowed, eyes glossy, and nodded like he'd just chosen a harder version of himself. A neighbor, The one in the ball cap who'd stared at the ground earlier cleared his throat and stepped forward too. His hands shook, but he spoke anyway. "I didn't say anything when I should have," he admitted. "But I saw him help her. He didn't do anything wrong." That statement mattered, not because it was dramatic, but because it was someone breaking the silence that had protected cruelty. The older man stood a little apart, dust still clinging to his pants. Someone offered him a bottle of water. He accepted it with a quiet nod, throat tight, not from thirst, but from the strange shock of being treated like a human again. An officer asked if he needed medical attention. He shook his head. "Just want to make sure she's all right." "You did the right thing," the officer said, simple, sincere. Around them, apologies began to surface. Awkward, incomplete, sometimes self-serving. "I didn't know," one woman muttered. "We were just being careful," another said, as if carefulness required humiliation. The older man didn't lash out. He didn't even argue. He watched their faces and saw something he'd learned in hard years. People often confuse fear for righteousness. The vest man's role in the neighborhood association, or whatever loose structure had enabled his performance, was addressed quickly and formally. A board member arrived, looking rattled, asking what happened. Officers explained. Footage was referenced. Statements were logged. Within days, through channels that didn't rely on gossip, he was suspended from any volunteer enforcement capacity pending investigation. If his vest came from a local security contractor, the contract was reviewed. If it came from his own closet, that fact became part of the file too. Self-appointed authority, acting without training, escalating a medical emergency into public persecution. But the story didn't let the crowd off the hook. The officer's questions made it impossible. Who said he was stealing the car? Who told others he pulled her? Who instructed others to film instead of call for help? Names were noted, not to ruin lives, but to attach responsibility to actions that had been too easy in the moment. Online, the narrative began to reverse. The same clips that had framed the older man as suspicious now showed the fuller context. His steady voice asking for an ambulance, his blazer laid on the ground as a barrier, the vest man blocking shade, the woman naming him as her help. The teenager posted an update later that evening. It wasn't polished. It wasn't defensive. It was raw. He admitted they got it wrong. He urged people to stop harassing the older man. He said filming had felt exciting until he realized what it did to someone's life. The community changed in ways that weren't perfect but were real. A neighborhood meeting was held. Chairs arranged in rows. Faces turned toward each other instead of screens. Guidelines were introduced. No detentions by volunteers. No self-directed enforcement. Coordination with actual authorities only. Training requirements for any organized safety role. The Women's Foundation funded first aid training sessions and a public awareness effort about medical emergencies and responsible bystander behavior. How to help without escalating harm. How to call for aid. How to resist mob momentum. The older man was not turned into a mascot. Nobody put his face on a banner. Instead, his presence became a mirror the community couldn't avoid. They had seen how quickly they could become a jury with no evidence. Now they had to live with the record and decide if they wanted to be better than their worst moment. Weeks later, the older man sat at his small kitchen table with a morning light slanting through thin curtains. The house smelled faintly of coffee and old wood. The same chair that had held him through bills and grief held him now through something quieter. Possibility. On the table was a new folder, clean, official, stamped with a company logo. Inside wasn't a handout or pity offer. It was an interview confirmation, rescheduled with a partner employer after the original opportunity slipped away in the chaos. The woman's team had made the call, opened the door, insisted he be heard. But he still had to walk through it. He still had to show up with his answers, his experience, his steady hands and steady mind. Nobody could do that part for him. He ran his fingers over the folder edge, then looked up at the hook by the door where his blazer now hung. Cleaned. Pressed. The thrift store fabric looked almost proud in the stillness, as if it had survived something important. He touched the pocket where that worn envelope had sat on the day everything happened. He remembered the weight of it against his ribs, the bus fare, the resume, the fragile plan. He remembered looking at the time and choosing to stay anyway. Not because he wanted to be good, not because he wanted credit, simply because leaving would have made him someone he couldn't live with. The interview itself was modest. A small office, a couple of people across a desk, questions that weren't designed to trap him. He answered with honesty. He didn't mention helicopters or crowds or viral videos unless asked. He talked about repair work, maintenance, responsibility, safety, things he knew in his bones. He asked questions too, because he'd learned that dignity wasn't just surviving. It was participating. He walked out into the city air afterward and felt his shoulders loosen, not from triumph but from relief. He had been seen. Back home, the neighborhood meeting took place in the community hall. The room was quieter than it used to be. Fewer phones, more eye contact, the kind of discomfort that comes when people have to face themselves without a screen between them. The teenager stood up when it was his turn. He didn't perform. He didn't joke. He spoke in a voice that still sounded young but no longer sounded careless. "I thought I was just recording," he said. "I didn't think about what I was helping build." It was easy to join in. It was hard to stop. People shifted. Some nodded. Some stayed ahead, swallowing their own guilt. The older man didn't speak much. He didn't need to. His presence was enough, quiet proof that the worst thing they assumed about him had never been true, and that the best thing he did had cost him something real. The woman recovered. She didn't turn the incident into a personal crusade for revenge. She pursued a formal review because systems that allow unchecked ego to masquerade as safety don't just harm one person. They set traps for the next. On an afternoon that looked almost identical to the morning it all began. Same sunlight, same dust, same road. The older man stood in his yard. The grass had grown a little. The tree's shadow stretched in a familiar shape. Everything looked ordinary again. But the yard felt different, as if it held a memory the ground wouldn't forget. Big moral moments don't always happen in big places. Sometimes they happen on a quiet road where a crowd decides a story before it knows the truth. He watched a car pass, slow and careful. A neighbor waved. He waved back. And the question that lingered wasn't about helicopters or wealth or embarrassment. It was simpler and heavier. When the crowd is loud and the truth is quiet, which voice do you choose to amplify? And what would you want strangers to choose if it were you?